Movies rely on self-reflection. At first glance, this observation seems insipid and shallow, but follow me if you would. The stories conveyed in movies, or really any medium, come with an inherent bias that they are always being consumed by someone. Or rather, it is the consumption of said media that functionally matters more to an individual than the existence of the media itself. I know what you're thinking. Yeah, no duh, a movie I watch matters more to me than an ancient tablet I've never read. But again, bear with me. When we watch a film, we project our feelings onto the characters and world. We witness the events, imagine how we would feel, observe the verbal and nonverbal communication of the characters, run that all through our brains again with modifiers coming from the editing, cinematography, and music, then we throw that concocted emotion right back onto the screen as our interpretation of how the characters must be experiencing the moment as well. All these processes happen within mere moments as part of our brain's deep-seated biological instinct to relate to each other, even in experiences that we have never been a part of. I have never lost a sibling to cancer, nor have I been used for spare parts, barring the few years I sold my plasma for some extra cash in college. But I am still at least able to feel some similar feeling for the struggles of Abigail Breslin's character in the film My Sister's Keeper. Even if I don't mimic the pain of losing the sibling, I see their suffering, and then I experience my own independent sense of sorrow for the person they are losing and the pain they are experiencing about it. Now imagine that the characters interacting on screen aren't two separate beings, but ostensibly the same being. Movies about clones take this instinct to engage in self-reflection and insertion of the ego into media, and then to take it potentially to the most drastic extreme of literalness. Now, we are witnessing a character who is witnessing a character who is witnessing themselves. Add or subtract a version of that line based on how many clones there are, or if the character is the original or not. Now, forgive me, but I'm going to be stretching the word clone to mean any additional instance of the same character in the same place, time, setting, or scene. Meaning, for the purposes of this argument, any time travel shenanigans where a character is able to witness or talk to themselves from the past or future gets counted as a quote-unquote clone. So for example, Bruce Willis's version of James Cole from 12 Monkeys gets shot down in front of Joseph Melito's version of the same character, meaning one of them gets counted as a quote-unquote clone. Whoever is the original in this instance doesn't matter for this episode, and if it did, I still won't focus on it to avoid the keyboard barrages of the nearest paradox enthusiast. Now, it's hardly worth mentioning that this setup allows for one of the greatest mentor setups of all time, particularly in the time travel shenanigans where the past self has the opportunity to receive what is essentially amounts to guaranteed prophecy in any of the paradox-proof settings where knowledge of the future allows somebody to change their future choices without suddenly unraveling the conversation into non-existence. And there's a lot of fun to be had in those stories. The younger version gets the equivalent of a gift from Apollo, and the older version of the character gets perhaps a reminder of how difficult they were as a kid, and that can be a lot of fun. But there's no denying that one side gets way more from this interaction than from the other. But the angle I find more fascinating is the development that comes from a story that uses the opportunity to have the younger, less experienced character teach the older version of them something that advances their development. I mean, this kid just came out of a vat an hour ago. How much could they possibly have to teach a full-grown adult? Well, a lot as it turns out. I'm going to start with a couple of familiar examples and then focus in on one that I think will genuinely surprise you. First, and likely most familiar to a general audience, would be the lessons learned by Ebenezer Scrooge as he's being haunted by the ghost of Christmas past. As the first haunt goes on, Ebenezer sees the memories of his younger self and the slow, mostly self-inflicted downfall into conservatism. Don't get mad at me, because I am right. Even though these shades are unable to interact with him, just seeing them and the person he was is enough to show him that it wasn't in his nature to be bitter or cruel. The world just wore him down enough to where he had a reactionary instinct to put up barriers between him and his loved ones to prevent ever being poor, or more accurately, experiencing the suffering that being poor inflicts. Keep that idea of the older version being reminded of their nature, we'll be circling back to it. But for now, we can use A Christmas Carol to show the kind of lessons that a future character can learn essentially through the power of hindsight. If a character, or maybe an audience member interested in self-care, takes a moment to look back and empathize with their past self, they can look at events that they may feel have had a pivotal impact on their changing personality, even if they don't understand why they reacted in such a way. A person may think that their actions or reactions are totally justifiable in the moment, and maybe they were, but it is a lot harder to make conscious choices of character in that moment. Up until that ghost visit, Scrooge felt that his current position was the logical conclusion, that perhaps he may wish that things turned out differently, but that his path was the one that he was always going to go down. Yet when he is shown his past, he laments many of his choices and mourns the person he used to be and the happiness he used to feel before slowly sinking into his identity as a curmudgeon. He wishes that he had seen what he was becoming in the moment, and knows he could have been better if he had seen what he was turning into. But without frequent and thorough self-reflection, that's a regret that can only come in hindsight. Are you starting to see the pattern of introspection here? Don't worry, it's only going to get more blatant. The rest of our examples are going to take the idea of self-reflection to a very material place. This is the attack of the clones. Don't worry, these are actual clones this time. Most of these function pretty similarly, so I'll jump around a bit with generalizations and summaries between the Star Wars Clone Wars, i.e. Jango Fett's buck cheeks pressed against the photocopier of Kamino, and Logan. These movies and shows deal with clones in a very literal sense. Genetic copies that may vary a bit in the epigenetic expressions and some science sex swapping, but very much focused on making copies of one dude in particular. The Star Wars clones treat the situation mostly like a very large sibling group. While they know that they're all genetically the same person, it is established pretty early on that even beyond the general variation of personalities based on experience, there's also a large enough difference between any two clones that they are felt as distinct entities in the Force. In this setup, clones are constantly learning from one another, not only in a brothers-in-arms capacity, but also constantly having it reinforced that they are entirely capable, inherently, of upholding the values of bravery, loyalty, and competence that helps their predecessor be selected as the subject for an entire cloning program. Now, in Logan, X-23, the clone daughter of Wolverine, introduces a parental dynamic with Logan, being the reluctant father you would expect from a wanted man on the run and an aversion to personal attachment caused by the slow and methodical elimination of everyone he ever cared about due to an anti-mutant bigotry. However, as much as he wants to run away from parenthood, he also knows how cruel those willing to experiment on mutants to create weapons are, and knows that X-23 deserves to live a life without being exploited or harmed. Now imagine if we took that sense of protection to a younger version of yourself and used it for the same level of self-reflection that we see in A Christmas Carol. Well, allow me to introduce you to the inspiration for this video, Dogman. Yes, the spin-off of Captain Underpants, and yes, I am being completely serious. The antagonist of Dogman in the movie Dogman is a hyper-intelligent cat named Pete. During a fit of rage, having no worthwhile sidekicks able to match his villainous genius, Pete purchases a cloning machine in hopes of creating a perfect contemporary copy of himself at his current age, but instead mistakenly creates a clone of his younger self named Little Petey. Obviously, he's disappointed that now, rather than having a criminal partner, he has a toddler. And what's worse, it seems that Little Petey doesn't have a bad guy bone in his body. How could that possibly be? Pete is an evil genius after all. He was always going to be a villain, right? Well, no. See, we get more about Pete's background, and in both movie and the Dogman books, we see that he wasn't exactly given a fair start. Abandoned by his neglectful and abusive father, and orphaned when his loving mother died from an illness, Pete fell into a pattern of bursts of rage and resentment, leading to harsh punishments that create a negative feedback loop that has Pete basically entrenched in crime for so long that at this point he only sees himself as being a bad guy. And then comes Little Petey. Fresh out of the cloning vat, Little Petey shows that he absolutely knows what kindness is and expresses that feeling of affection to Pete, who he immediately imprints on as his child. Of course, the typical "I'm not nice, I'm evil" shenanigans begin to play out with Pete trying to distance himself, but the entire time we see at least some level of hesitance or discomfort with the idea of being liked, and later an unease about repaying Little Petey's affection with emotional distance or outright hostility. Pete insists that if LP is going to stick around, he better get used to the idea that the world is horrible, and he better get horrible too before he gets disappointed. And it almost happens. Towards the end, Little Petey has become disillusioned with the world and is starting to see what his father, in his morose melancholy, has been trying to teach him. Pete, however, has been receiving help and love constantly from Little Petey, and can't bear to see his heart broken. So he tries to cheer him up by saying that he can't deny that the world has problems, but that it can't be all bad, because little Petey is in it. He sees little Petey as an individual with a kind heart who deserves to be happy and cared for, a person whose gentle nature should be appreciated and is absolutely deserving of being protected, something that he hadn't experienced since he was a small child before his mother passed away. And that would be a heartwarming enough ending for any adopted child story. But what sends this over the top for me personally is the fact that Pete has no choice but to realize that this all applies to him too. He started out life with the same kindness and love in his heart and that his new son has, because his new son is him. He's what would happen to little Petey if he were constantly abused or neglected by the world. And little Petey is where he began life before that exact thing happened to him. By recognizing little Petey's worth as a person and believing that little Petey makes the world better by being in it, he has no choice but to recognize that this also applies to him. If he wouldn't hold it against little Petey for feeling hurt by the world, then he should hold it against himself. And while it may be a late start for him to live a life of joy and kindness, if he wants little Petey to have the life that they both deserve, then he has to be willing to fight to create that world for little Petey, the world that he needed.
How come I made you, but you're not like me?
Maybe I am, but you just don't like that part.